Did you know that Kings Island was the first theme park in the industry to sell pizza? Interesting, huh? It's so widespread now. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics. Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because that's who we are, and that's who we care about the most. Don, we all love LaRosa's, don't we?
We do.
Awesome.
What's not to like about it?
I really like it, and it's what's funny is it's always been associated with Kings Island, and I actually worked there for 3 years when I was in high school. I think that was before I knew you. But, when I was in high school, I worked there, and it wasn't until then that it clicked on me that, "Oh, it's a local pizza place at Kings Island. That's kinda cool." How did the
Yeah.
relationship come to be?
Well, first of all, that was my introduction to LaRosa's
Oh,
Pizza.
really?
Was Kings Island. Yeah, in '72. Wasn't called that at the time, but you knew it was they had like things you knew it was a local chain there. But prior to the park's opening in '72, and then putting pizza in, like you mentioned, no other park had done that. I mean, you had hot dogs, you had hamburgers, you had fried chicken, other finger foods. Those were all the essentials that you found at parks. And Kings Island, when they were building International Street, uh, there was going to be a couple of open spots on International Street. They did not have the money to fill them internally. So they started looking to the outside to see who might be interested. And there was a guy named Greg Pansero and his father Jack. They offered to take one of the spots, and they chose to make pizza. Um, so they got the recipe from LaRosa's, and kind of went from there. It was so popular that first year that 1973 they opened the second location in Rivertown. Now, a lot of people think that location has been there since the park's opening, but it wasn't. So that came in the second year, and they did a lot of things with that they probably wish they'd done with the first one, because there wasn't a lot of seating or anything outside of the Roses on International Street. But the one in Rivertown, it had the outdoor seating with the tables. You could get, the umbrellas and things, so get in the shade a little bit. So that was the second one, but it really just took off, and became a staple. And when you look at Kings Island today, that was the first of what's become those opportunities. They have a little taste of Cincinnati when you go to the park. With you got Grater's ice cream, you got Skyline chili, so but La Rosa was the first.
Yeah, LaRosa's, it was the first. That's interesting. I actually thought that the Rivertown one was original to the park. Was the building there, or was the building
No,
so they built the building for
no, no.
73?
Yeah, they built the building specifically for LaRosa's. There was nothing there. There are some old time photos that you can look at. I know there's an aerial shot from the Eiffel Tower that is out there. A lot of people have stolen and used that photo on their social media. But you've got Swan Lake and everything, and you can see the log flume and what Rivertown looked like in '72. But you can look off to the left and you see that there is nothing there, just the street, the road,
Yeah.
curving around to go up toward where the train depot is now. So, but yeah, it was new, and I had an opportunity. The years I worked at Kings Island, sometimes in the spring or in the fall, when staffing was a little short due to the schools, being in session, or maybe like a Winterfest event, really, super busy or something on a Saturday to go in and help out at those locations and actually make the pizza, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I fondly remember. I mean, I didn't work at LaRosa's at the park, but it's fun to do because it's very satisfying to put on the sauce and cheese them up and stuff. Let me ask you this: pretty much everybody thinks that the park LaRosa's tastes better than outside the park LaRosa's. Why do you think that is?
Well, a couple of reasons I think come to mind. Number one, the atmosphere. I think that adds to a lot of the food that you're going to eat, at an amusement park or a theme park. Just being in that atmosphere, it's going to taste a little bit better than, going to the restaurant to do it, just because you're usually in a good mood and things, and it just kind of adds to it. The other part, I think, is the ovens. Um, I think that those are, the ovens that, La Rosa's would have used back in the day. And I think that has a lot to do with it, that it's a little bit different than what you're going to get at the locations.
I also
But I agree, it is better at the
it
park, I
is, and
think.
I think they put more cheese on it too. Because I mean,
I
just
know I
from
did when I was working there.
well, when I worked at LaRosa's, it was like, yeah, I mean, for any of you that have worked in any fast food, I mean, you worked at Chick-fil-A at one point with the maestro from Phantom Theater Encore at one point, but the you know that you make your own concoctions and stuff, and what it tastes like to me is when we used to take just handfuls of cheese and put them on there. And that's what it seems like. I don't know for sure that that's what they're doing, but that it definitely brings me back to that memory. So maybe that's what they're doing. They just don't have time to measure out 10 ounces of cheese or whatever, so they throw it on there, and that's why they have like the best cheese in the industry.
Well, I think too, I know from making them, when I, helped out the park too, there's a lot more, you're putting a lot more pepperoni on it. You're putting a little bit, maybe a little more sauce on it. You're definitely putting a little more cheese on it than what you would have at a restaurant location where, like you said, there is more time to kind of measure it all out.
Yeah, and the thing I would challenge anybody that, has only eaten LaRosa's at Kings Island, if you go outside of the park, it's not like it's gross, because the cool part about LaRosa's, though, is that their economy of food that they have on their menu is so big. During the off season, my girlfriend and I, and usually some friends, will go, and they have some, like, fantastic salads and stuff. They've got great pastas. None of these are available in the park right now, but if you are in the area, and you're not gonna be eating at Kings Island, uh, try one out. It's definitely interesting. Now you mentioned
Yeah, and it's a staple for sure. When you talk to people and, you ask them, you say the word Kings Island, what comes to mind? The Eiffel Tower, the Beast. LaRosa's is up there too, so it's one of those three or four or five things that come to mind when you're talking about Kings Island.
Yeah, actually, it was funny. I distinctly remember this conversation. I have a friend of mine. They visit the park regularly now, but they were talking about how one of their fondest memories as a kid is when they made their one visit to Kings Island annually. They would always grab, a slice of LaRosa's pizza and sit next to the fountain and eat it there. So that might be part of what you to your point of the atmosphere and the mood and why it tastes so good. Um, I think it's really cool. But you mentioned earlier that so the pizzeria that was on International Street was La Rosa's Pizza, but it wasn't La Rosa. So it's almost like a Starbucks proudly serves. Um, did La Rosa's ever get involved, or what, is it still to this day?
Well, the name, the name came about, it was all their ingredients. So the name came about, a couple years later, became LaRosa's. I know it was for sure in the 80s when I was going there about every day. Wish they had the dining plan back then. I certainly would have taken advantage of that. But, when you're visiting Kings Island, I mean, did you really visit if you didn't have LaRosa's pizza?
No, the answer is no. Well, and it's funny because there were a lot of times in the 90s where it was like, "Oh, I'm going to Kings Island. I wanna go there for the pizza." The food is such a big attraction now that it's almost like, "That's just pizza." "Let's try their steak and potatoes," something like that, but, yeah, it's such a staple. The one on the so life hack, the one on International Street is often very busy. The one in Rivertown isn't. So just back behind the Eiffel Tower before you hit the Beast, just hit that one up if you want your pizza.
Yeah, I prefer the one back by the Beast of the two.
Do you?
Just because, yeah, I mean, I think the setting back there is really nice. I do like the fountain, being able to sit there and you got the water and everything, but I just think the setting back there, you're kind of in that Rivertown area. It was a really cool place to eat your pizza, whether it was your lunch or your dinner. When they had the original bat was in the location next to it, and then you had the vortex, you get to see the trains roaring by. So it was it was a little bit added experience at that point in time when those attractions were there. But yeah, I've always, for whatever reason, I think maybe it's just back in that part of the park. I always love that area.
I agree. So let's bring up the elephant in the room because somebody's gonna tweet at us if I don't bring it up, but there is an apartment above the La Rosas in Rivertown. I believe that was supposed to be for Gary Walks, the original GM, right?
Yeah, that's what the word is, that was going to be for him. Kind of like you could use that as an office, or if you had to stay overnight or something. A lot of things happen too when you're an executive of a park, that you're there real late at night and everything. So I've been up there. I even tried to ask back in, I think it was like 2008 or 9 or whatever, if I could move my office there, and the answer was no. But yeah, there is an apartment up there.
Yeah, and it's from what I understand, it smells a lot like La Rosa's being on top of a La Rosa's. Yeah, it's got shower facilities and everything. I mean, nowadays they use it for a green room for some of the Winterfest stuff. So it's occupied again, but that's very interesting because all these buildings have second stories, and a lot of them are just forced perspective, and a lot of them are just facades and stuff. But this one really has a second story. It's got a real staircase going up to it, above the Rivertown La Rosas. But um, we would like to elaborate more on that, but there isn't a lot more to say. It's an apartment. No one's lived in it for probably 45 years or more, if anyone ever lived in it. Um, but that's just a fun fact. Don, we have a tweet. We wanted to answer a tweet from somebody. We put out on our Twitter at tower underscore topics to send us your Kings Island questions. And this one's coming from Travis at Diggity the Dog. And this is a good question for you to answer because you were kind of in the midst of this. So when changing the park over from Paramount's Kings Island to Cedar Fair's Kings Island, what was some of the harder changes that had to happen during that transition period? So transitioning from Paramount to Cedar Fair.
Well, first of all, outstanding question.
Hmm.
We appreciate the question, and if you have any, be sure to get. I don't know what you don't say tweet anymore, but
Excess.
send it to us on our X, X, Xs or whatever you want to call it. But I think I came in it during that transition, and the hardest challenge was each were different in how they operate. Cedar Fair amusement parks were what they did, great operators. On the Paramount side, they were far and away more advanced technology
Hmm.
wise than Cedar Fair was, and I think that was the biggest thing is trying to merge those two together and take the best of what Cedar Fair did, the best of what Paramount did, and pulling that all together. And they're able to do it. So now you got the best of both worlds there. But I think that was the biggest challenge was just trying to take what Paramount did so well with the technology and what Cedar Fair did in terms of being in park operators. I mean, they were amazing at it. That's what they did. When you have the Paramount, and they still operated the park very well on that, but it still wasn't what there was just one of many many things that they were involved with was the amusement park side.
Yeah, and and coming from a guest from the inside and from the outside, because I ran the fan site at the time, so I talked to people, but I've never worked for Kings Island. But I- when they did their conference call, they because it's kind of like the quarterly conference call that they do, but they did it because this merger was such a big deal. They talked about how they were gonna take the best from each asset and merge them together. And it's funny because your instinct would be that Cedar Fair people would take over. Every Paramount person is laid off. Every Paramount thing is gone. And then you moves on as, the Cedar Point of the South. But that's not what happened. It was a very earnest opportunity for them to take over. And you mentioned the technology, the uh, the the front gate software. Cedar Point didn't have anything like that. Paramount developed it called Gate Central. That was a Paramount property that they got with the acquisition. And nowadays it's given. You go to Universal, Six Flags, anybody, they can scan your pass, they can see how many visits you had and stuff like that. But at the time, if I recall, when you would scan a season pass, it would be like it's good or it's not good. If that. But
Yeah, the technology, yeah, definitely wasn't there with the Cedar Fair parks, and I can remember, going maybe even a couple years before, went to Valley Fair, and it was just, took your ticket, just ripped it, and like tossed it into a bucket kind of thing almost. They had the turnstile thing; they would just throw it in there. But yeah, they were just counting tickets,
yeah, and
so there
that's
was it wasn't as up to date as what you have now. And I think the other, piece of this is I'm often asked because I'm old and I'd been around, since the park opened, is, what was it like in the Taft days, when the park first opened and, through the 80s, what was it like before, Paramount got it and everything? I would say that, once Cedar Fair got the park, it kind of got back to being close to how it was operated as a Taft park in terms of operations. So I think they brought that element back to it.
I agree. And the problems with Paramount were it was never under poor leadership, ever, ever, ever. And if there's a testament to that, it's the fact
No,
that,
it's great
oh
leadership.
yeah, all the Paramount people are running Cedar Fair now, Richard Zimmerman and so on. But the problem was so this is just a short history on it. So Paramount bought Kings Island and the other parks, and that was a little convoluted. But their intention was to essentially make a seasonal Universal, Disney, whatever. Not long after, um, I'm trying to think of it. Who bought Paramount? Viacom. I don't know why I lost that.
Viacom,
Viacom
Viacom.
bought Paramount, and then all of a sudden the parks were involved in like a much bigger corporation where they were a very small piece of the pie. And, you can theorize either way, but, uh, there was a lot of really cool investment when we're talking about Top Gun and stuff like that at the beginning, and then it turned into a ride with the name slapped on it like Face Off. There were some poignant moments, like the Nickelodeon stuff was awesome that they did, and they wouldn't have been able to do that without Viacom because Viacom owned Nickelodeon. Um, but yeah, Cedar Fair coming in, they came in at the right time. Paramount, CBS wanted out, and then they came and bought it. They bought it. They paid very, very heavily for it, but it was a good buy because 1.25 billion, and now the parks have to be worth 2 billion, 3 billion. I don't know. I'm not an adjuster, but they definitely came out ahead, and that's where we are in the world. But yeah, I remember another thing that was really tough with the transition was just the name alone. What if they changed the name of Kings Island? What if they made it Queens Island or something? How many things need to be changed? Like from Kings Island to
Yeah,
something else. Every
yeah,
I remember even as late as like 2010 or so, they'd have one of those like phones at the rides open and it would still say Paramount's Kings Island inside of it. They had to get rid of the stuff that was publicly facing very quickly. But, for the stuff that's internal where they have to rebrand and stuff, that took a decade easily.
yeah, exactly. But great question. We appreciate it. Definitely, if you have any questions about Kings Island, you know, definitely send them to Ryan and I on our X.
On our X, Tower_Topics. All right, I'm Ryan Sir along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower_Topics.